Alright, what is up guys, it is Storm back here with another video, and in this one I am bringing you part 27 to the New Dawn of Naruto / Boruto story. Now if you want to check this story out for yourself, the link to it will be down in the description below. But before the video begins, if you like the content you're seeing, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment. I mean, they're all free, so why not? If you want some dope channel merch, the link to that will be down in the description below. And if you want to see more of me, be sure to go check out my other channels and go follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, which will all be linked down below. But without further ado, why don't we just dive right on in. Thunder clapped, and lightning crackled across the sky. The heavens were dark with storm clouds, perpetually weeping in an attempt to drown the land and the people of the land of rain. Boruto liked it. Their new home deigned to greet him with his elements, lightning and water. Both were aplenty here. Boruto could feel the window vibrate as the wind howled. The small tavern they were renting was dirty and cheap, but it kept them out of the storm. That was the most important thing in the land of rain. Keep dry and warm. Hikari sat in one of the two beds, sharpening her needles and applying poison to them. It was only just past high noon, but you would think it would be evening if you looked at the sky. The entire country seemed to be locked in an eternal twilight, somewhere between dusk and midnight. Boruto pressed a finger to his tattooed seal and channeled his chakra into it. He had spent many hours cataloging and organizing every scroll from the former layer of the Akatsuki. The jutsu he wanted to try was something of a legend among the people of the land of rain. He unfurled the scroll, quickly rereading it again, just to make sure. He contorted his hands in quick succession, molding his chakra and bending it to his will. Bird, rat, ox, monkey, rat, snake. Boruto felt his chakra leave him in a great exodus of energy as he directed it skyward. He had underestimated just exactly how much chakra the rainmaker jutsu used. It gathered in the clouds, spreading like a sickness and infecting the heavens. Then Boruto felt it. He could see the fishermen down by the docks, struggling to pull in nets of floundering fish. He could sense the trio of rain ninjas perched in willowy trees overlooking the lake, nearly 3 miles to the east. He could sense the butcher down the road, dumping a bucket of gore into the street. At the very farthest reaches of his senses, he could sense the old hermit he and Hikari had passed in the mountain pass at the border of the land of rain and rivers. Boruto felt his cheek burn and blinked. He was laying on the wooden floorboards of their room, Hikari kneeling over him. He held a hand up to his cheek where she had slapped him. "Ow," he said. "You used too much chakra," she informed him snidely. "Do not use that technique again. At least not on the scale you used. Keep it smaller, focused." Boruto nodded. His chakra reserves were not fully grown, and wouldn't be for 4 or 5 more years. And the technique was created and used by Nagato, who himself possessed the Rinnegan. He didn't have that advantage. But someday, his strength would be great enough to use the technique to its fullest. Boruto intended to train himself into a coma to maximize his chakra reserves before that time came. Hikari pointed out the window. "Did you do that?" she asked. Boruto peered out into the twilight. The heavy rainfall had slowed to a slight drizzle. He hadn't seen it stop raining since they had arrived in the dreary country nearly 3 days ago. "I don't think so," he answered. Hikari shrugged. "We should make good use of the weather. We've been stuck here for more than a day. Who knows when the rain will let up." Boruto agreed. He slung on one of the heavy black raincoats he had found in the Akatsuki hideouts, remnants from the first iteration of the organization, led by Yahiko. Even after being sealed in scrolls for so long, they had held up remarkably well. They kept his body warm and dry, a feat that was impressive in a country famed for its cold climate and rainy skies. The two of them set out from the small tavern they had rented a room in and began to run northwest. Simply walking in the land of rain was an exercise in chakra control. The constant downpour turned the ground into a marsh of mud that could swallow a grown man whole. Travel over land was mostly restricted to ninjas. It was an odd combination of water and sand walking, but it kept them from drowning in sludge, and that was all that mattered. Boruto took it as a training exercise, refining his already natural precise chakra control even further. They were heading to a small cove in the northwest portion of the country. It bordered dangerously close to the land of Earth. But Boruto hadn't paid the dangers any mind. The comment of the Tsuchikage still hung in his mind. If one of her ninjas crossed his path, he'd delight in showing them just how much of a stain on the name of Hokage he was. Hikari had extracted a veritable treasure hoard of information, from a lesser noble's son. By the way she told it, Hikari practically had the man soiling himself. Boruto trusted the information was accurate. After much debate, they decided to offer their support to the Sugawara clan. They were a minor clan who enjoyed the popular support of a good fraction of the people. The Sugawara clan came to power by taking advantage of their country's natural export, water. They sold it to the parched land of wind and the hidden sand, making Rio hand over fist. They used their newfound wealth to enter the political arena, and had enjoyed success there for several generations. According to their informants, the Sugawara clan had holed up in the mountains bordering the land of Earth. Rumor had it that a small force of loyal men to them were camped in the cove they were currently heading to, and hopefully that would provide them their inn. Overhead, the thunder clapped. The rain began to fall heavily again, and Boruto could feel the cold seep into his bones. He sighed. The weather was fickle in the land of rain. It was the perfect storm, as Hikari liked to dub it. The country was nestled between the mountains of the land of earth, wind, rivers, and fire. Clouds built up, heavy with rain and unable to pass the mountains. That led to a near perpetual rainfall. The only difference was in how much rain fell in a single day. Luckily, their contact to be was just up ahead. Boruto could see the entrance of the cove every time the lightning flashed. He and Hikari ducked into the cove, sighing in relief as they were granted a reprieve from the rain. At the back of the cove, a handful of torches glowed softly. Boruto crept forward, his footsteps light. Something wasn't right. His ears twitched as he heard the telltale twang of a bowstring. He rolled forward on instinct. An arrow sunk deep into the muddy earth he had been standing on. He turned, having already weaved hand seals, and spat a beam of water at the rocky edge he thought the archer had perched on. There was a crash as stone broke under the pressure of the jutsu. A figure leapt into the darkness of the cave and disappeared. Hikari stepped forward and hurled a handful of throwing needles into the darkness. There was no hiss of pain, nor thud as a body dropped to the ground. She had missed. It was the first time Boruto had ever seen her miss. "Come out!" Boruto barked, his voice echoing through the cave. There was movement in the shadows, as armed men emerged. They were a ragtag bunch, bandits, thugs, and thieves. Their clothes were worn. What little armor they wore was rusted and patched with mismatching material. Their weapons, however, were well maintained and sharp. They gleamed in the dim firelight of the torches. "Are you members of the Sugawara faction?" Boruto asked, palming the hilt of a kunai. The fact they had attacked first led him to believe that they were not. In fact, members of the faction they were looking for. The men chuckled. "Yeah, sure kid, that's us," one of them said, stepping forward and brandishing a sword. Boruto's eyes narrowed. In the blink of an eye, he hurled a kunai forward. Lightning arched from the tips of his fingers as the knife left his hand. The kunai sunk deep into the man's chest, piercing his armor with ease. He died on the spot. "Kill him," one of the men barked. The cove descended into a chaotic melee. Two large, barrel-chested thugs ran at him. Both had large spears clutched in their hands. Boruto dodged the first spear, then leaned into the guard of the other man before he could attack. He prodded him with his index finger, sending a lance of chakra through his heart. Boruto had a close-up view as the thug's eyes widened in pain and disbelief, before he too joined his comrade in the Pure Land. The other thug roared in fury as Boruto casually leaned backwards, avoiding the thrust of his spear, and dragged a kunai across his neck. Blood splashed across his cheek, but Boruto ignored it. He turned to find Hikari dancing between men swinging their blades at her. She would take a step, throw a needle, then take another step. Every time she did, a man dropped dead or dying. Boruto smirked. He fished out a handful of shuriken and threw them at the distracted mob. 4 men cried out in pain. One dropped to the ground, clutching at his throat. There were only a handful of men left standing when Hikari was through with them. They stood back to back, and retreated deeper into the cave. Boruto could see their swords shaking and unsteady arms from where he stood. They were dead, and they knew it. They picked the wrong marks to rob. They charged all as one. Hikari threw 2 needles at the first 2, then stepped into the third's guard and crushed a fist into his sternum. The sound bone-breaking echoed through the cave. Hikari dusted her hands theatrically. "Well done," Boruto congratulated her. "Let's see if our bandits have anything good on them." Boruto kneeled to sift through one of the thug's pockets. Then he heard the twang of a bowstring. He rolled sideways this time. Good thing too, because the arrow sunk into the mud a good 2 feet in front of where he stood. Had he rolled forward, he would have been dead. Boruto sighed. He had forgotten the archer. Then, the cove was lit by a great ball of fire roaring down at them. Boruto leapt away, rolling to a stop and exhaling blasts of water as thick as his wrists toward the darkness. Hikari had ducked under an overhanging rock and avoided the fire. She hurled a handful of throwing needles, but hit nothing. The sound of boots slopping over mud echoed through the cave. Two men emerged from deeper into the cove, one dressed in a snug, dark outfit that clung to his body. He had a crossbow held in his hands, a bolt already knocked. The other was dressed in a heavy dark green raincoat, a kunai clutched in his right hand. Both men wore rebreathers and he had a headband with 4 bars etched into the metal. Rain ninjas, which meant next to nothing. The hidden rain was all but a defunct village. Boruto had been surprised to learn that they had not 1, not 2, but 3 men claiming to be Amikage. Their forces were scattered and broken. There was no military might in the land of rain. It took us a long time to recruit these kids, the man with the kunai said darkly. You'll pay for killing them. He nodded once to his companion with the crossbow, and he melded into the darkness. Boruto sighed. His eyes faded from blue to a pale lavender. The archer was perched behind him, on a ledge overlooking the cove. He produced a single kunai and slung it backwards without looking. He heard a strangled, gurgling gasp followed by a loud thud as the body of the archer fell to the muddy ground with his kunai lodged into the man's throat. The other rain ninja looked at him with clear fear, his eyes locked with Boruto's own. There weren't many who didn't know the Byakugan. He turned and ran. Hikari was already in pursuit, slinging poison needles at him. To the man's credit, he dodged or blocked them. Impressive skill. Boruto followed Hikari as the man tried to evade her. A few seconds later, he cried out in pain as a shuriken sunk into his left heel. He fell to the floor, clutching at his leg. Who are you? Why did you attack us? Hikari demanded. Maybe they were just bandits. Maybe they weren't. She wasn't taking any chances. Tetsu, the man cried out. Boruto frowned. In the darkness, something moved to his right. It was so large he thought it was a boulder, but boulders didn't have chakra pathways, did they? He leapt backwards as something came crashing down between him and Hikari. Boruto gasped as a man stepped into the light of the torches. Man did not seem to be a word you would describe him with. He was a mountain, twice as tall and twice as broad as Boruto himself. He towered over him. Yet Boruto could tell there was not a lick of fat in his body. It was all muscle, thick as any armor. In his right hand, he clutched a sword that was as long as Boruto himself was tall. A shorter sword hung in a sash around his waist. There was hardly notice before the man lashed out with the sword. Hikari leapt into the air as it cut through the stony walls of the cave as easily as it cut through air. She kicked off a rock and landed softly next to Boruto. Together, the two of them slowly backed out of the cove. Enclosed spaces didn't seem to hinder the mountain of a swordsman, so they would retreat where they could more easily move. The swordsman followed them, and the rain ninja from earlier followed closely behind him. Neither one saw Boruto drop a scrap of ceiling paper in the muddy ground as he ducked out of the cove's mouth. The swordsman's boots missed the scrap by an inch as he marched out of the cove. The rain ninja, however, stepped on it heavily. An explosion tore both his legs from his body, leaving him in a bloody pile of spilled innards. The swordsman turned and frowned at the body of the former rain ninja. He turned to face Boruto. His brows narrowed in concentration. In the light of day, Boruto had admired the specimen of a man. He had to be at least 7 feet tall, probably more. His arms at their thickest were nearly as thick as Boruto's waist. Thick red hair was held in a top knot that was rapidly darkened when exposed to the rain. A pair of cold, crimson eyes stared back at Boruto's lavender ones. The swordsman couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years older than him. Boruto darted forward, his right arm extended. He would fall with a gentle fist, as sure as any other man. Bigger just meant there were more places to stick a blade. There was a flash of silver. The veins in his temples writhed as Boruto came to a sudden stop. Pain blossomed in his face as the blade of his swordsman cut through his nose, severing skin and cartilage. Blood ran over Boruto's lips and down his cheek in rivulets. Only his Byakugan had saved his skull from being cleaved in two. The swordsman was fast. Too fast. Faster than a man of his size had any right being. Boruto sucked in several breaths through his mouth before he could inhale any blood. That would be a fatal mistake. The swordsman was obviously skilled. Hikari hurled a barrage of needles at the man. Boruto smirked. His smirk turned to ash as the swordsman whirled on the needles and struck them down so fast that Boruto could hardly follow the motions of his sword with his Byakugan. He swallowed audibly. Rushing forward, he focused on the swordsman's blade. He lashed out with his hand, chakra lancing from his fingertips. The swordsman swung his sword at him. Boruto ducked, but felt the blade take a portion of his hair with it. He threw his fist forward in a jab. Then a fist as large as his entire skull slammed into the side of his head. Boruto's world went black. He blinked several moments later, spots in his vision. He was lying face down in the mud. He felt something prod him in the ribs. Hikari's foot. She stood above him, a machete in her hands, a remnant from their time in the land of rivers. She was no swordsman. The mountain of a man easily trounced her with the blade, but she brought him enough time to recover. Boruto leapt to his feet, putting several yards between him and the swordsman. He weaved hand seals. There was one thing Boruto knew about the land of rain. Those who could use water release reigned supreme. He spat a beam of concentrated water at Hikari's back. She dodged at the last moment. The swordsman, confronted by the jutsu at the last moment, brought his sword up to block it. Boruto thought it would mangle the man's sword as it had any other weapon. Instead, the swordsman's blade glowed blue with chakra. With a single slash, he deflected the jutsu. Boruto grit his teeth and leapt forward in a blur of speed. He was in range of his divination. Boruto wanted to see him block the 8 trigrams palms. 2 palms, Boruto cried, lashing out with both fists. The swordsman's blade met his fist in an explosion of chakra. Boruto staggered and couldn't even blink as another fist the size of a boulder crashed into his sternum. The air was knocked from his lungs in an instant. Boruto flailed backwards, gasping for breath. "You are a worthy opponent," the swordsman spoke. "It is an honor to cross swords with you. This one is known as Tetsu." Hikari helped Boruto to his feet, a handful of needles clutched in her free hand. "He's too fast," she whispered. Tetsu shifted his stance. "Your fighting style is indeed fast, but you appear to have never faced an opponent of similar prowess. This one shall show you the errors of your ways," he said, brandishing his sword. Boruto growled as the truth in the swordsman's words rang true in his ears. No one had been as fast as him. No one, not even Eiji. Sure, his father and master were, but they outclassed him in every way. This was his first opponent whose speed matched his own. This was his first opponent where his gentle fist was not enough. "Arrogant bastard," Boruto hissed, rushing forward in a burst of speed. He lashed out with his fist as his chakra thrust forward. Tetsu met his gentle fist strike with the edge of his sword. His arm was battered away, and then a leg as thick as a tree trunk slammed into his gut. Boruto grunted as he was sent soaring through the rain and crashing into a nearby tree. Hikari leapt to the sky, inhaling a great breath of air. She exhaled, and spat a wave of water that crashed upon Tetsu's sword. With a single swing, he cut the wave in half and stepped forward. Hikari was already weaving more hand seals. Lightning arched from her fingertips and danced across the puddles. It leapt from raindrop to raindrop, creating a storm of electricity that surged towards the swordsman. Hikari's eyes narrowed dangerously behind her mask, as Tetsu's sword glowed blue once more. She vaguely recognized it as the saber technique the samurai of the Land of Iron used. "Flash," he intoned, swinging his sword. A wave of raging chakra leapt from the edge of his sword and bisected the lightning jutsu in two, and still, it continued on. Hikari fell backwards, narrowly missing the attack. She watched as it passed in front of her mask by no more than a few inches. Then Tetsu was upon her, his sword raised high. A lance of water hissed as it cut the air. Tetsu was forced to block it with the flat of his sword. The sheer force behind the water forced the swordsman to take several steps backwards. Boruto appeared in a blur. His brows narrowed angrily. He fisted the fabric of his raincoat and tossed it to the ground, leaving him wearing nothing more than a mesh shirt of armor. Then he glowed blue. Lightning crackled and danced across his skin. The world slowed to a crawl as his lightning chakra seared through his nervous system, enhancing his reflexes. The rain seemed to fall in slow motion, giving him ample time to admire the drops. He could count the number of Hikari's stray hairs that blew in the wind. He was in his own little world. A world in which he was king. A world in which no man or woman was as fast as he was. Boruto surged forward in a flash of electricity. He grinned fairly as his gentle fist sunk deep into the man's shoulder. Not his sword arm, but it felt gratifying to finally deal him a real blow. How the thugs had convinced this swordsman of his skill to fight for them was a mystery to Boruto. Tetsu staggered backwards, obviously not having expected the sudden great increase in speed. He quickly righted himself, adopting a defensive stance. Boruto was upon him again, fists raining down. Tetsu took the first strike to his forearm, but caught the second with the flat of his sword. Then he did something Boruto knew no samurai did. He let go of his sword. All of Boruto's synapses fired. The veins in his temples bulged. His Byakugan zeroed in on a flash of movement. Tetsu's second sword had been drawn from its scabbard so quickly that his blade wasn't visible to the naked eye. Boruto leapt backwards, channeling chakra into the chakra metal of his mesh armor for all the good it would do. Boruto skidded through the mud as he felt the warm, sticky sensation flow down his abdomen. A quick glance revealed that his mesh armor had been easily slashed, and a thin cut across his torso had drawn blood. Ido, the one word no ninja wanted to hear when facing a samurai. It was the skill that made Mifune a legend. The old samurai general could cleave your head from your shoulders before you could even form a hand seal. Boruto didn't know why a samurai of Tetsu's skill was in the land of rain, but he didn't care to find out. He just wanted him dead. His blood sang. Finally, someone who could match his lightning armor. Eiji had been an okay sparring partner up until he mastered level 1. Then, the student became the master. Since then, he had only used it 3 times in a fight. The first against a group of cloud swordsmen who outnumbered him 20-1. The second against a million Ryu bounty who specialized in speed, not fast enough. The third against his team. This would be the fourth. The first time his enemy had actually been worthy of it. Boruto charged forward, leaving arsing footprints in the mud. Another flash of movement. Another quick draw arsing towards his chest. He leapt to the side and earned a shallow gash along his arm, running from his shoulder to his elbow. For his wound, Boruto closed the chakra point in Tetsu's sword arm's shoulder. The fact that he had only had time to close a single point, even with his lightning armor activated, spoke volumes for the samurai's skill. They clashed again. Boruto closed the chakra point in the man's abdomen. For his victory, he was dealt a bone-deep gash on his calf. And again, Boruto closed 2 points in Tetsu's chest. The swordsman's blade cleaved a length of skin off his ribs, and again, Boruto closed another point of the swordsman's sword arm. The tip of Tetsu's sword cut between the webs of Boruto's fingers, leaving an inch wound that dug into the palm of his hand. Boruto's chest heaved as he felt the effects of chakra exhaustion and loss of blood assail him. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Hikari watching the two of them duel closely. She was waiting for the most opportune moment to strike. She only needed to sink one needle into their opponent's flesh and it would be over. But Boruto didn't want it to be over. He felt his heart beating like a drum in his chest so loud that it rattled his bones. His blood hammered in his ears so loudly that he couldn't hear anything else. He wanted to be the one to end the battle, not her. He wanted to prove, not to anybody, but himself, that he was strong enough to overcome any battle. Boruto thundered forward, a battle cry tearing from his lips. His right fist glowed with arsing, chirping lightning. The rods and cones in his Byakugan were all firing. He saw Tetsu's entire body tense. Wave of muscle rippled as he drew his sword. The blade moved too fast for his eyes, as powerful as they were, to follow. But he didn't step back. He stepped in. Boruto ducked low and threw his shoulder forward. He felt the sharp bite of steel parting flesh and bone, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. There was no retreat. 1 foot in front of the other, he pressed forward. His right fist lashed out and struck the swordsman in the chest with a clap of thunder. A mountain of a man was bodily thrown from his feet and sent crashing into a small copse of willow trees. His sword had caught fast in Boruto's shoulder. Boruto sagged as his lightning armor dissipated. He wobbled over to the samurai's first sword that he had discarded. Picking it up, he channeled lightning through it. The metal turned cherry red and melted and warped beyond use. Hikari appeared beside him, holding him upright. She guided him over to a small boulder next to the mouth of the cove and ushered him to sit. "You're a fool," she hissed under her breath. Her hands glowed green with the soft light of the mystic palm. In a quick jerky motion, she pulled the sword and his shoulder free. Boruto whimpered in pain as fresh blood flowed down his chest. It was stemmed barely. A moment later, she placed her palms over the wound. "You are beyond lucky. Do you know how many arteries that sword nearly cut? You'd be dead if it was an inch deeper or further," she chided him. Boruto chuckled darkly. "I won, didn't I?" Hikari scoffed. "Men in their pride," she spat. Flesh began to knit back together. Muscle would take longer. Bone, even more. Its clavicle had been cut clean in twine. Boruto's eyes peered at Hikari's own behind her mask. He smiled weakly at the concern he saw reflected there. Then there was movement in the copse of willow trees. No way. No fucking way. The mountain of a man rose again. He staggered into the muddy clearing, a crimson stain marring his robe top. He drew in deep, ragged breaths. Boruto couldn't believe it. He had a dozen close chakra points and a gash in his stomach that would put down even the most sturdy of men. Tetsu collapsed to his knees. You are a most worthy foe, he rasped, digging in the folds of his robes. I concede defeat. Would you honor this one with your name, Muddy Warrior? Boruto swallowed. He considered lying, but the man had impressed him with the skill and admitted defeat. A dark part of his mind whispered that he shouldn't tell the truth. Another one said he should honor the man's request, perhaps his final one. In the end, honor trumped pride. Boruto Uzumaki, he said. Tetsu nodded, pulling out a long, sharp dagger. It was equal part ceremonial and utilitarian. Its hilt was wrapped in fine red silk, and the pommel was a ruby or as red as blood. It reminded Boruto of Sarada's eyes during their spars. Beautiful, but deadly, just like the Sharingan. It had a crossguard of gold, but the blade was a beautiful silver steel. It was an honor crossing blades with you, Boruto Uzumaki. If I might have a final request, burn my body with a strong western wind, so that my ashes may return to my homeland. Tetsu spoke solemnly. Then he raised his dagger high with both hands, preparing to sink it into his abdomen. Boruto gasped in horror. Ritual suicide. Seppuku. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the desire to cling some part of his shredded morality. Maybe it was the strange circumstances that placed the samurai in a band of ragtag thieves. Maybe it was the crimson hair and eyes, so like that of his clan. He slapped away Akari's hands and flashed forward. He winced as he felt his shoulder wound tear open, spilling warm blood down his chest. The dagger came down with the same impressive speed and strength Tetsu had shown in their duel. Even wounded, Boruto was fast. There was a reason Hikari liked to fashion him the title Lightning Bolt, even though it irritated him. He liked the name. It was a good one, named after his prodigal uncle. He braced both arms and caught the man by the wrist with his forearms. Boruto sunk to his knees under Tetsu's impressive strength. With a flourish, he bent the larger man's wrist at an odd angle and forced him to drop the dagger. He pocketed it, and scooted backwards, just in case Tetsu took his actions badly. The swordsman's crimson eyes bored into Boruto's own. Boruto allowed his eyes to fade back to their natural cerulean color. The danger passed. Hikari was knelt beside him, quickly and angrily healing the wound he had just torn open. Why? Tetsu rasped. That was the question, wasn't it? Why indeed? Boruto looked up at the man, even on his knees. Tetsu was as tall as he was standing. From his seated position, Boruto only came up to his navel. I don't know, he said. You don't belong here. Those men back there were scum. The lows of the low. You're not. Too strong. Too fast. Too talented. Boruto winced as Hikari began to run a needle and thread through his skin, sewing the wound together. His eyes met Tetsu's. Who are you? Boruto asked. Tetsu frowned. This one is but a humble ronin, he answered. I walk the road of life in search of an honorable death. Boruto scoffed. An honorable death, as if there was such a thing. Once you were dead, that was it. There was no honor in death. You just ended, or went to the Pure Lands, if you believe in that crock of shit. There is no honor in death. If you want honor, live, he said. Tetsu's stare was unnerving. Boruto flinched as Hikari pinched his nose with both thumbs, putting it back into place as she began to heal it. The swordsman really did a number on him. The way of the samurai dictates that I must find honor in death. I have disgraced my master, Tetsu said. What master? That sack of shit back there? Boruto said, throwing a thumb over his shoulder and pointing at the smear of blood at the entrance of the cove. Tetsu's brows narrowed, in either anger or displeasure. Boruto wasn't sure which. I owe that man a debt. He saved my life when no other would bear a humble ronin such as I. Alas, it was my previous master whom I disgraced. I failed to defend his life. It was only his last order that prevented this one from following him in death, he said. Hikari pulled Boruto to his feet, and held his arm aloft so she could have access to his ribs. She peeled off the remnants of his mesh armor. Boruto whimpered quietly as she did so, feeling skin coming off with it. Then she gently placed her hands on his flayed side and began to mend the broken skin. Boruto sighed in relief as her chakra washed over him. It was cool and soothing, like ice on a hot summer's day in the leaf. Boruto's eyes roamed over Tetsu's features as he pondered the man's story. It was a pitiful tale, even if he didn't know the details. Samurai were warriors who held honor above all else. They chose a single master, and followed him until they died, or their master did. Then they followed him to the Pure Land. Those who didn't choose to follow their master in death, or betrayed or otherwise lost favor with their master, became the pitied Ronin. Tetsu's hair and eyes were so distinctly crimson that he had to have been an Uzumaki, or had some Uzumaki blood in him. The only other people who had hair similar to theirs were the Kazekage's lineage in the Hidden Sand. Whilst closer geographically to the Land of Rain, Boruto couldn't help the dregs of hope that welled up inside of him at the possibility of finding another member of his clan. The Uzukage in the struggling hidden whirlpool could use all the strength they could get. Tetsu was powerful, nearly as powerful as Boruto himself. If he was an Uzumaki, he would be a great boon to their clan's recovery. Boruto turned to Hikari. You could tell by the steel in her eyes that she knew what he was going to ask before he even said the words. "Heal him, please," he asked. Boruto could see her eyes twitching through the thin slits of her mask. "Please, Hikari," he begged quietly. Hikari sighed, kneeled, and her hands began to glow with a soft green light as she ran them over the wound on Tetsu's abdomen. Boruto activated his Byakugan and undid the blocked chakra points he had closed. He frowned when he saw that Hikari's chakra reserves were dangerously low. He didn't know she had used so much of her chakra to heal him. She only performed the basic battlefield first aid. He could bear the pain and heal naturally on his own. She didn't need to spare him that pain. With a sigh, Boruto began to weave hand seals. He was slow and methodical. It was one of the first seals the Uzukage had taught him, and one of the most dangerous to unrestrained and undisciplined seal masters. He placed the palm of his right hand on the muddy ground, and a series of inky black markings spread under his feet. Good. It worked. Forming one hand seal with his left hand, he placed his right palm at Hikari's back. She tensed, but only for an instant before relaxing into his touch. Chakra draining seal. Release, Boruto commanded. The seal glowed blue. He felt the seal invade his pathways, leeching his chakra, and passing it to Hikari through his arm. With his Byakugan, he could see the chakras mix and mingle as Hikari's own reserves were bolstered by his. After a few moments, he released his seal and collapsed to his knees. Boruto's chest heaved. He didn't think he had given her that much chakra. Empowered by his chakra, Hikari began to heal the wounds Boruto had dealt Tetsu. It was deep, and mangled some of his intestines. It would take time and several healing sessions, but she could repair him. "It will take time, but I can heal him," she informed the two men. Boruto nodded, then crawled into the cove and out of the rain. He ignored the corpses and promptly fell asleep between two large boulders. Hikari shivered and rubbed her arms with her hands. She was cold, as usual, and her hair was still wet from the rain. Tetsu, the mountain of a man who could break her with a single finger, sat across from her around the fire. He was as silent as the grave, and hadn't said a word since Boruto had asked her to heal him. That was just fine. She didn't trust the samurai as far as she could throw him, which she couldn't at all. But she trusted Boruto, and he had to have had a reason for sparing the man. If Tetsu wanted to commit his ritual suicide while her only friend was asleep, she would be more than happy to let him. It was too bad he had passed out after transferring his chakra to her. Hikari shivered again, as the last dregs of Boruto's chakra coursed through her pathways. She had always known he had an impressive amount of chakra. It was a given. He was part of the Hyuga, who were touted as the most powerful clan in the Leaf. All of their clansmen had higher than average chakra reserves, as well as a powerful dojutsu. He was also a part of the Uzumaki, a clan so feared for their long lifespans and mystical prowess in the sealing arts that they were hunted to near extinction. And his parents weren't just any members of those clans. They were the best of the best, the Hokage and the heirs to the Hyuga. But it wasn't the quantity, but the quality, that set her senses ablaze. She had felt powerful chakras before. Eiji's was like a brooding storm, dark and heavy and ready to explode at any moment. The Mizukage's as cold as ice, but as sharp as steel. But Boruto's was something else, unbearably hot, yet cold at the same time. The heat made her break out in goosebumps and her hair stand on end. It was electric, not in the sense of a thunderstorm like Eiji's, but in the sense of raw lightning itself, wild and unpredictable. with a bite that stung more than any blade and was blinding in its intensity. She could deal with sensing it. She had since they began training together several years ago, but she couldn't deal with feeling it. It was inside her and it made her feel restless, like the nerves she used to get before a battle, half excited, half terrified. Had Tetsu not been there, Hikari would have been pacing restlessly back and forth. Since the swordsman was, she just grit her teeth and bared it. Hikari glanced at Boruto's sleeping form next to where she sat. She didn't know how he could feel like this all the time. It was intolerable. She felt like she needed to be up and doing something. She didn't like to feel so energized. The legends of the Uzumaki's vitality were absolutely true. She had proof. Hikari flinched as Boruto's eyes sleepily blinked at her. She turned and gazed into the fire before he could catch her staring at him. She watched as his higher cognitive functions began to take hold, and his body went rigid as he tried to figure out where he was. When he realized he was safe, he relaxed and sat up. "How long was I out?" Boruto asked. 73 minutes, Hikari informed him. She had counted. Anything to try to burn through the excess energy she had. Boruto made a "that's interesting" noise and stretched. He sat closer to the fire, warming his limbs. Hikari had grown used to the warmth that the land of fire and rivers gave her. The cold of the land of rain was a shock to her senses. It was like being home in the land of water all over again. "So, Tetsu, do you have a last name?" Boruto asked suddenly. Hikari wondered what his aim was. She had a feeling she was about to find out. The mountain of a man frowned. "No, I was an orphan. When I was old enough, I was drafted into the military of the land of iron," Tetsu answered. "Huh," Boruto commented. Hikari could practically see the gears turning in his mind. He seemed to ponder something for a moment. "So what brought you to the land of rain?" Hikari watched as Boruto idly massaged his tattoo that she had given him. Tetsu frowned, but answered nonetheless. "After my time with the land of iron, I journeyed forth to find a master I could pledge my life to. I found him here, in the land of rain. I served him to the best of my ability for many years," the swordsman answered. "I see," Boruto said. "But you're a Ronin now. How did that happen?" Hikari saw Tetsu visibly grow saddened. Boruto should have known not to ask a samurai about their dishonor. He was one of the noblemen vying for leadership of this country. One of his allies betrayed him, and he was slain. With his dying breath, he ordered me to live on, denying me the honor of accompanying him to the Pure Land, Tetsu said. Now that interested her. They were here to offer their services to the highest bidder after all. Traders were often the highest bidder because they had no intention of paying that bid in the end. Hikari wanted to know what clan she should avoid. Tetsu's face grew stern and his eyes shone with an inner steel. "The Mononobe clan," he all but spat. "Traitorous dogs." Hikari knew who the Mononobe clan was. They were an old family who immigrated to the land of rain from the land of grass many decades ago. They hailed from a wealthy family who owned vast swaths of land and grass. They imported food from their farms and sold it at great profit to the impoverished serfs of the rain. The country simply drowned all but the most hardy crops. Agriculture was not a powerful industry in rain. Using their newfound wealth and power, the Mononobe clan began to integrate themselves in politics and rose to the highest offices. They were greedy, and they were corrupt. All traits Hikari didn't mind, but they were dishonorable, something she couldn't abide by. No one crossed her. No one crossed them and lived to tell of it. She amended, casting a sideways glance at Boruto. "You said the two of you were looking for the Sugawara clan, yes?" Tetsu asked. Hikari and Boruto both nodded. "Why?" Boruto cleared his throat. "You could say we are Ronin ourselves, in a way," he answered. "We were looking for a master and a cause. We found it here. The Sugawara clan seemed like the most just clan to support." Tetsu considered them both for a moment before nodding. "And thanks for sparing my life. I shall lead you to the true Sugawara clan. The men you slew today were bandits preying on the weak in their name," he offered. Hikari watched Boruto smile. "We'd appreciate it," he said, pressing a finger to his tattoo. A scroll appeared in a wisp of smoke. She made sure to make no noise nor expression of recognition. It was the scroll that Uzukage had given him. Boruto unfurled the scroll and held it out to Tetsu. "Hey, mind trying something? Channel your chakra into this scroll," he said, ever so casually. Hikari palmed a handful of throwing needles. If the man dared to attempt to steal or damage the scroll, she would murder him. Tetsu looked at Boruto strangely, but reached out and pressed a single giant finger to the parchment. A moment later, nothing happened. Hikari stayed tense. That didn't mean anything. She couldn't read the scroll either, after all. "See anything?" Boruto asked. Hikari could hear the slight tint of hope coloring his voice. Tetsu frowned. I cannot read, he admitted. Hikari could see the look of disbelief and anger in Boruto's face. Who couldn't read in this day and age? Education was compulsory in practically every nation. Being an orphan did not exclude one from an education. That's okay, but can you see anything on the paper? Anything at all? Boruto asked. The swordsman frowned as he peered at the paper. There are symbols and drawings of hands, Tetsu ventured. The smile that lit up Boruto's face was from ear to ear. He furled up the scroll and sealed it within his forearm. Good news, you're not an orphan anymore. Your name is Tetsu Uzumaki, Boruto declared loudly. Welcome to the family. You could be my long-lost great-great cousin or something. Hikari's lips turned ever so slightly upwards as the mountain of a man weathered Boruto's verbal assault, as he began to explain their shared ancestry.
愛してる